If you want a gothic, edgy, dark ranking video, then you're in the right place, because here's going to be a ranking video of all Tim Burton films, released on Friday the 13th, a day that's perfect for the kind of films that he does. I already did a Friday the 13th ranking video on last year's Friday the 13th. Hot off of seeing his latest film, Beetlejuice, a sequel to one of his most beloved classics, I thought it'd be a fun project to do. The twist here is that it's not going to be all Tim Burton films, just the ones I've seen, which is all the noteworthy, iconic ones. The ones you think of when you think of Tim Burton. Before starting this project, I had to catch up on a few classics I hadn't seen, and then there were just some smaller, lesser-known ones that either I didn't have time to watch, or I couldn't have given two shits about watching. All of the films here will be the iconic ones that Tim Burton directed, with one notable exception that you can probably already guess what that is. So with that in mind, sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy. "2010's Alice in Wonderland is complete f***ing garbage. You would think the combination of Burton aesthetic and the classic Alice story would be a match made in heaven. And while I thought the visuals were okay, the movie is just so dull and boring and just bad in so many aspects. It's the complete opposite of wonder, and by the end, you'll be begging for it to be off with your head. This movie."
Stop it.
Tim Burton directed the 2001 remake of Planet of the Apes, and I'm not sure his sensibilities really made sense for an Apes film. I will say that in the pre-extensive use of CGI world, the practical ape costume effects are pretty impressive. But the direction and storytelling aren't great here. Things get surprisingly boring, and you get a movie that works at the most on a C-grade movie level.
Kill them all. Planet of the Apes.
Unlike most other Disney live-action remakes, Dumbo was actually at its best when it was following closely the story of the animated film. This is when the storytelling was at its best, the movie had the most heart, and it was actually focused on Dumbo. What a concept. The visual style of the movie worked too. But the movie's story kind of goes off a cliff in the second half, where the story goes in an original direction and just starts to get too big for its own good while the focus gets taken off of Dumbo. And then he gets turned into like an action hero at the end. It's like, oh Jesus, what the f*** happened to this story?
Dumbo.
I had heard some truly awful things about 2012's Dark Shadows. Admittedly, after watching it for the first time, I thought it was decent. It plays into its combination of being a dark horror comedy, although if you ask me, it needed an extra dose in all of those aspects. It certainly looks like a Burton film, and in speaking of looks, Eva Green looked sensational in this film. She was fine as f***. Like other Burton films though, it doesn't really know how to end, as it kind of stumbles as it gets to its climax.
Are you stoned or something?
They tried stoning me, my dear. It did not work.
Dark Shadows.
Sleepy Hollow was one of the Burton films I hadn't watched until recently, and I had heard some pretty good things about the movie. Like most Burton films, I dug the classic look and aesthetic. There was another reliably good performance from Johnny Depp. And most of all, I really dug the fact that the film was rated R, so you get your time's worth in terms of the Headless Horseman slicing heads off. But all of this is undercut by too much of the film taken up by a badly put together whodunit story. Had it not been for the gore, the second half of this film would have really lost me.
Sleepy Hollow.
For years, I thought 2012's Frankenweenie was an original story idea from Tim Burton. It wasn't until watching it for the first time recently that I learned it was a remake of a live-action film. Oops. Regardless, it's a cute story though about coping with grief, and the combination of Burton's stop-motion aesthetic plus the black and white looks beautiful. The movie was definitely at its best though when it was more focused on Frankenweenie. Once it gets into random creature feature territory towards the end is when it started to lose some points for me. There's actually a fair amount of aspects about Batman Returns that I liked more than its predecessor. Loved Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman, and Danny DeVito was great as a pretty f***ed up version of the Penguin. But this movie was a prelude to some of the issues that would come in the later 90s Batman films. Things just get too silly as the Penguin's crazy plan gets revealed, and the mad circus type vibe and atmosphere clashes with the dark aesthetic that we see through the film. Through the movie's faults though, I don't think it's a bad movie though, it's fun enough.
Batman returns on June 19th.
Tim Burton's Corpse Bride is more inspired stop-motion filmmaking from said director. Its lack of direct holiday theming is probably why it didn't get the shine that another Burton stop-motion classic does. But of all the stop-motion films to feature a romance between a man and a dead woman, this is the best one.
Jewels were missing and her heart was bust.
1994's Ed Wood is the kind of film that Hollywood loves, one where it's kissing its own ass for 2 hours and telling the story of 1950s director Ed Wood, played by Johnny Depp. It's probably my second favorite Depp performance in a Burton film. That's really saying something. I love the black and white aesthetic and the direction to go with it. But I think the film is a better character study than it is a full-fledged movie. I think a lot of it just kind of meanders around, with all that's keeping you interested is Ed Wood himself and the look of the film. This was one of the Burton films I hadn't seen until recently, and for the most part it lived up to that hype, as I had heard it was one of his better films. Better, but not memorable, as it doesn't really feel like a Tim Burton film, but in some ways I guess that was a good thing.
The juice is loose.
Beetlejuice was a fun return to the chaotic dark comedy world of The Ghost with the Most. For me, the film was highlighted by its consistently entertaining dark comedy energy, and it felt like Burton getting his groove back in terms of making those quirky, dark aesthetic films that he made his name for.
You're a figment of my imagination.
Really? Is this a figment of your imagination?
As a young kid, I saw Charlie and the Chocolate Factory way before I ever saw the original Willy Wonka film. That might have been what altered my perception of this film compared to others, but I've always thought it was pretty good. It had that childlike perspective of wonder as you discovered how this crazy chocolate factory worked. The setting and humor were good, and it had a much more satisfying ending than the original film. I know there's been pushback over the years when it comes to Depp's Michael Jackson-inspired Willy Wonka, but if the idea is to have Wonka be a childlike, cocky, enthusiastic chocolate maker, then that came across here, and it did feel like a character that would belong in a Burton film.
Willy Wonka, here he is.
1989's Batman is far from being the perfect Batman film. There's just a little too much focus on the Joker and not Batman himself. It's still iconic and entertaining for many reasons. It was the start of bringing a darker aesthetic to Batman in media, and there was definitely a whole lot of fun to be had in the showdown between Keaton's Batman and Jack Nicholson's Joker.
Wait till they get a load of me.
The original Beetlejuice is a pretty chaotic but entertaining movie. This 1988 classic is a pretty crazy story idea, but it's a whole lot of fun thanks to Michael Keaton's iconic character and the Burton aesthetic-like qualities. It's also noteworthy for being the film where a young Winona Ryder really made a name for herself. Oddly effective is the best way to describe 1990s Edward Scissorhands. Such a f***ed up looking character, ends up being so sweet and lovable, and part of such an oddly charming love story that works on all levels as a movie. You get horror, comedy, romance, and even a Christmas movie to top things off.
Edward Scissorhands.
Hold me. I can't.
Despite the full title Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, he actually didn't direct the film. That was Henry Selick, the director of Coraline. But obviously it was his story idea, he produced it, and his fingerprints are all over it in terms of the look and feel. It's easy to see why the film is the phenom that it is, because it's a masterpiece in terms of artistry, music, and combining two diverse holidays into one forever lasting hot topic classic.
And what did Santa bring you, honey?
Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, is a true masterpiece. It's based on the Broadway show that I know nothing about, but seemingly the material in that show is perfect for Burton's sensibilities. This is what I was alluding to as far as Johnny Depp's best performance in a Burton film. You feel the rage and anger in every scene he's in, and the singing was pretty good also from him and Helena Bonham Carter. The movie's juggling great music, great performances and direction, and eventually you get great gore in Sweeney Todd and turning him into the Demon Barber. It's a truly f***ed up film that's fantastic and will get my vote for being Tim Burton's best movie.
At last, my arm is complete again.
And there you have it with my ranking of all Tim Burton films that I've seen, which is pretty much all the iconic ones. As I mentioned at the start, I excluded some of the lesser known ones that I haven't had the chance to see yet. I just didn't get the time to watch those for this project. Oh well, if you have a problem with that, tough. This was another fun ranking and marathon project to do though. I always love it when a director has a signature style. I said the same thing when I did my Christopher Nolan ranking video earlier this year. And despite the ups and downs when it comes to the quality of Burton films, you could say the same thing of any director, to be honest. You gotta love that he has true vision, and that pretty much every film that he does feels like a Tim Burton film. If anything, this marathon and ranking project gave me a deeper appreciation for his collaborations with Johnny Depp just because there were so many of them. Hopefully they can do another film before it's all said and done. Given the massive box office success though on the opening weekend of Beetlejuice, maybe there will be another 30 years later sequel in Edward Scissorhands 2 in the future. You just never know sometimes. So that'll do it for this ranking of all Tim Burton films. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.